And I'm sorry if I'm going to ask a question that you may have already answered, and forgive me, because when we start talking about this, I start hearing blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to understand is with the experiments, I guess what you're trying to find out, the bottom line for me was that the system, that you want to show that the system modifies itself. Is that?
Yeah, it modifies, it makes choices
So-
according to our choices based on a theory of constraints on how the system gets rendered.
And
yes.
that comes from the double slit experiment.
Yeah, the double slit is the kind of the fundamental thing that I'm working with. I'm just configuring it in ways that it's never been done before. So it's a similar kind of experiment, but it's actually a different experiment, but it uses the same double slit concept to get it to work.
And is the computer system self-aware?
Yes.
Okay.
So the computer system, which is, in my book I talk about the big computer, but it's the computer that renders this reality. It's aware. Consciousness is consciousness. It's aware. And it adjusts according to what we do and what we require of it. Now the opposite viewpoint of that is reality is just a big machine. That's where physics is now. It's just a big machine. It's a deterministic machine. If you do this, that will happen. And every time you do this, that will happen, because it's just a machine. And if you could know the state of this machine, if you knew all the particles in the universe and what their, momenta was and the direction they were moving and the state they were in, then you could predict everything that would happen in the universe to the end of time. That's a deterministic machine. It always works in the same way. And that's the opposite viewpoint. I'm saying it's not a dumb machine. It's an aware consciousness that's rendering the virtual reality.
Okay, so then, I guess I'm trying to, because I don't understand the system. I looked up what double slit experiment was in Wikipedia. So, and it just went over my head about the light particles and all that, but that's the bottom line, that you're trying to see how
Yes.
it modifies, then
Right.
that it's not random, that it changes and...
Yeah. It's not deterministic, it's not random, it's some thoughtful process that changes as we modify things. It works then differently.
So wouldn't the computer, as a means to self-survival, create like a fail-safe, not to be discovered, or as not to let people figure out that we're in a virtual reality? I mean, I'm just wondering.
Yeah. Well, in order to have a really good virtual reality, it should be very difficult, if not impossible, to tell that it is a virtual reality. If you can tell it's a virtual reality, then it's not a very good virtual reality. I mean, that's the way virtual reality is. So now the virtual realities that we create are not perfect, because mostly they're just vision and hearing. That's it. But you don't smell it, you don't feel it, you don't taste it. So you got 3 of your senses that aren't engaged. You only have 2 senses engaged. So it doesn't feel entirely real. Yes, you put on the goggles, you may stand on a platform that shakes or wobbles or tilts, so you get a sense of being on a hill or going uphill or whatever. And that's pretty convincing. And if you've been on the rides at Disney World and what's the other one down there?
And over there too.
Huh?
There's a simulator.
Yeah, they have a simulator. If you get in these simulators, you realize they're very effective. They can trick your vision and your hearing into really feeling like you are there participating in it. But they're not as good as our virtual reality. Yeah, so that's that. they try to make it better. But if they could make it so that you could get the smell and the taste and the feeling and all of that, then it would be very difficult for you to tell the virtual reality from this reality. You'd go into that virtual reality and have all the same quality of this reality. Well, now you've got goggles on and you can feel the straps around your head and you've got this and that strapped to you and sensors on your body and you feel all that, so that's not quite real. So what they'd really need to do is just remotely interact with your brain chemistry. That they could duplicate signals in your brain that you moved your muscles and did things. Then they'd have a virtual reality that would be just as real and just as impossible to tell as this one. And in my book, in the last chapter, I talk about Sam's virtual reality emporium. So that is the case, that if it's a good virtual reality, you can't tell that it's a virtual reality. It's a really, really good one. You can't tell, except when you get to the very fine details of the reality. And now there's a few things that virtual reality can't cover up, like pixels. Virtual reality is going to come in terms of pixels, and if you can look down deep enough, you actually can see that it's pixelated. Nothing's continuous. Things have to go from this value to that value to that value, and it's not in a continuous line, but they jump from pixel to pixel. Well, that'll tell you that it's a virtual reality that is being computed, and there's no way the system can cover that up. So that's one way. And another way is the thing I'm trying to do with my experiments, which if there are constraints on the system as to how it has to maintain the virtual reality, then sometimes you can box it in a corner with those constraints so that it does something unusual and you can tell. Well, that's what the double slit experiment did. It boxed the system in because light as a wave had been known for 100 years. Light as a particle was a new idea. Okay, let's see about this particle. We put the particles through the double slits where if you put a wave through them, you'd get a diffraction pattern. Particles should just go straight through and land behind the slit. So now you've boxed the system in because the system's playing both games, and now you're going to force it to see, which game is it going to play when you put a single particle through a double slit. And it did the impossible by actually taking those single particles that go through the double slits, arranging themselves in a diffraction pattern. And it had to do that so there was no discontinuity between the particle and the wave. So the particle had to act like a wave when you put a lot of them through. So the system was stuck. It needed no discontinuity. If it had a discontinuity, then there would have been a problem. There'd be this issue in the world that it wasn't continuous, it wasn't smooth. So the particles, when put in a wave situation like double slits, had to give a wave result. So that is where you box the system in and force it to make a choice. And by that choice, it'll tell you something. Had those particles not made a diffraction pattern, then there would have been this problem of light's a wave, light's a particle, but they're different. One doesn't lead into the other. And that would have been a discontinuity. Or it could make the particles act like the waves by distributing in a diffraction pattern, and now you've got something that happened that's not explainable, kind of magic or a miracle, but that's better than actually having a discontinuity, because all that is a big question mark. But what about the idea of the system not wanting to be discovered, which is kind of where you're going? Yes, it doesn't want to be obviously a virtual reality. On the other hand, that's only from the perspective of the avatar. So if you're in it, it needs to be as perfect as it can be. But we're consciousness. We're not just the player of an avatar. We're consciousness. And as consciousness, we can do other things besides just make choices for our avatar. We are aware as consciousness. And as such, we can explore all of conscious reality. All the larger conscious system, it's our playground. We can explore it, we can learn how to use it, we can connect with it. That's all available to us as consciousness. But once we're logged on and only experiencing what our avatar experiences, then the virtual reality needs to be as good as it can get, where you really can't tell it's a virtual reality. The system has a good reason to help us realize that we're consciousness, because we're here to grow up, we're here to lower our entropy, we're here to become love, and the more we see our existence as a big picture, the more likely it is we're going to grow up. When you see yourself, when you see life only as a little picture, you tend to be self-focused, self-centered. That's what it is like to be in a little picture. As your picture gets bigger, then other people, other things, the environment, critters, all sorts of things become significant and important. It's not just you. And the more you understand that these other people and critters and environment is really a part of a bigger whole, just as you are a part of this bigger whole, you stop identifying yourself at the center of the universe. You start identifying you are kind of one, you're part of a much bigger thing. That leads you to caring about these other things that are parts of you and everything. That leads you to being less self-centered. That leads you to caring, leads you to empathy. So it leads you to cooperation, because now you see yourself as just part of a bigger whole. And that whole will work a whole lot better if we cooperate and care. That's pretty obvious. So seeing the bigger picture is what the system wants us to do. It really would like us to see a bigger picture rather than just be trapped in this physical thing. But as long as we are experiencing just what the avatar experiences, it needs to be a really good virtual reality, which means very hard to tell. But we're supposed to grow past that point of just being, the thing that makes choices for the avatar. We're supposed to see ourselves in a bigger picture. But how do you see yourselves in a bigger picture? It has to be in a bigger picture with other things. Seeing yourself as a bigger picture, like I'm the bigger center of a bigger universe, isn't helpful. You're still self-centered, you're still self-focused. So you have to see it in the context of being connected with other. So you need the virtual reality to give you the context, which then one day you can grow up and look at that context and see the bigger picture and you as a part of it. So yes, the virtual reality tries hard not to look like a virtual reality, but at the same time, the system wants you to see it as a bigger picture. Not necessarily a virtual reality, but just see it as a bigger picture. I come at it from a logical, scientific viewpoint, so I talk about virtual reality. But if you just come about it from the point of caring about people, it gets you to the same place. Mostly in the West, we have a hard time with that. In the West, we like logical process. We like to think our way into a spot. So the virtual reality concept gives us a stepping stones to get there, to see the bigger picture. But it's not a necessary concept. It's just necessary that you see yourself as part of something larger, that you see yourself as a player, not the master. That's important. And you don't need virtual reality for that. You just need to grow up. But if you like logical process and you need a logical way to get there, and it needs to be rational, then understanding it as a virtual reality is a path that will take you there rationally and let you see how the bigger machine works. So I'm a physicist and I needed a rational process to get there. So then I spent 40 or 50 years trying to figure out what the rational process is, because any process, any logical system has to have a logical process. It's there, it needs to be there. You don't necessarily need to know it in order to grow up, but it's got to be there. Otherwise, the system's not rational. It's haphazard. There is no continuity. There's no what's the word? There's no connectedness to it. So there's a logical process in there someplace. It's just a matter of trying to figure out what it is and how it works, which is what I did, trying to understand the nature of reality from a logical process viewpoint. So did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you. That was beautiful.
Okay, good. First of all, why it works, or why we have the reincarnational process, is because this learning process is not something that one can expect to accomplish in 60, 70 years. It just doesn't work that. There's too much to learn. It's a change of your being, and people don't change that much from their experience. So you're going to have to do it multiple times. Remember, this is an evolution machine. This will be kind of an odd way to express this to you. Only a physicist could say this, and I don't know whether you'll like it or not. But think of us in this reincarnational sense as sort of like the working fluid in a evolutional engine, right? Sort of like the refrigerant goes around in the compressor in a refrigerator. Each time it goes around, it gets cooled a little bit. And here we are, each time we go around, we decrease our entropy a little bit. So here we are decreasing entropy, turn after turn. We're the working fluid in an evolution machine. And that's our job. Yeah, I see the technical people are getting that. Yeah, they say, yeah, I see that. Other people kind of that don't relate to that. But we have to go around. It's a cyclical thing, because every time you cycle, you are trying to lose entropy, doing a little better. So that's why we have to have the reincarnation. The other reason is that people get trapped. What happens to the majority of people is that You know, there's a few times when you think you know everything. You know, one of them is 2. It's called the terrible 2s. You know, the next one is the teenage years, you know, and, you know, that's, of course, those are terrible as well. You know, then you get to about 40 or 50, and people kind of think they know everything. They've been there, they've done that, and there's not much that they don't know, and they have their beliefs, and basically they're dead-ended. They get in a corner. They box themselves into a corner with their beliefs, and that stops their growth. So they're just kind of there. Well, you have to give them a chance. You can't say, well, you're stuck, you're there forever. You know, for eternity, you're stuck there. What happens is they die, they get to start over with a clean slate without all those beliefs. They have to regenerate all of that intellectual thinking stuff over from scratch. Now, they don't start over from scratch as far as their quality of consciousness. Whatever quality of consciousness they attained in that last incarnation, that's where they start the next time. But they have to start from 0 as far as their experience base goes, which means all their beliefs and that kind of stuff has to come up pretty much from scratch. Now, that's not entirely true. I'm just giving you the kind of the bigger picture. When you pass from this reality frame, you're just shifting data streams. When you shift that data stream, immediately most people tend to be very confused because they don't know what's going to happen. They're confused. A lot of times they're frightened and terrified. Could be an accidental death, or even if it's just old age, they're often very terrified of death. And they kind of wake up, if you will. They maintain, they don't really wake up, they just continue consciousness, and they're in a different environment. And it's very disconcerting for most. And there is a whole reality frame, a virtual reality frame that's designed just for transitions. And that's what they do there. That's their job. And people who are transitioning, they basically are met, they're guided, and mostly what's being done is they're being set at ease. Relax, everything's okay, you're where you're supposed to be. Yes, everything's fine, you know, relax. Yes, your dog, you know, will get along, and all this reassurance sort of thing. What begins to happen almost immediately is that your past physical life starts to fade very much the way a dream fades when you wake up and you've been dreaming. Okay? It starts to just fade away. So all of those concerns, all of those you know, very, very important things that were on the top of your mind start to get less important and start to fade. You're taken to places that will assure you that you're in process. And a lot of that is just so you feel, because you come knowing that if, you know, you have to be doing something, you know, you need to be in process. You know, what line should I stand in? That's kind of the way you feel. Because if you're not standing in a line to do something or somebody do something to you, then nothing's happening. So we have these beliefs. So sure enough, they create process. You know, they create lines to stand in, they create places to go, things to do, people to talk to, and okay, your turn's coming, you know, next we're going to, and people kind of gradually then get they get decompressed from this reality into a larger, all the time the physical's dropping away. The dream that you just had of the physical is disappearing, getting weaker and weaker and weaker. Eventually, you are approached about another incarnation, about what it is you need to do. The idea that you're trying to learn and grow, if you are aware enough, if you've been through this enough times that you kind of, oh yeah, all right, I get it, then you will get to a place where they will work with you on what do you want to do next? What do you need to work on? Where do you think your problems are? And if you go, I don't have any problems, they will show you what your problems are and what you have to do next. That's what some of those databases are for. They'll take you and they'll run those databases and they'll say, well, look here, you see this where you gave this guy the finger when he, pulled in front of you, that wasn't nice, And you need to you have an anger management problem, You have this ego problem, and you'll go basically through a review. If you don't know the answers, they'll help you find them. You will see where your problems are, and there is no escaping. It's not like you can say, oh, well, that's not true. That didn't happen. They've got you good to right, and you know it. And a lot of things that you didn't even know that you did necessarily that were very unhelpful. may come back up, and you see it, and you go, oh, I get it. Okay, I really need to work on anger management. And then you decide, well, then let's put you in a place where anger management is going to challenge you, because that's how you get over things. You don't get over them by ignoring them. You get over by going into them and being challenged by them. So then they'll put you in that situation where, you're a father and you've got 4 teenage daughters, and anger management is really something that you need to work on. Anyhow, do I sound like a guy that had teenage daughters? I have 2 girls and 2 boys, and they're all wonderful. And if you know what you're doing, which is part of this question, if you know about the larger reality, if you understand how things work, you're better at playing the game than you are if you're totally clueless. So that's why this kind of understanding is really helpful, because it can help you interpret your experiences. Why is this happening to me? You start looking for your lessons. You start realizing that growing and the choices you make are very important, instead of just going through life like a zombie, doing whatever you do because you're doing it. You can kind of be aware, living in the moment, aware of your ego, aware of your anger, trying to reduce those things. If you actually make an effort, you can do a lot better, a lot quicker, a lot faster. You don't have to evolve in tiny, tiny steps. If you're totally unaware, then it takes you a long time before you start to become aware. But those of us who have been around a few times, and you come back and you're a zero, as far as you don't know anything in this physical reality anymore, you start over, we get nudged a lot. Things happen to us. Paranormal things pop in our face and go, hey, there's a bigger reality out here. Remember. And it takes you along, so you get back a lot more quickly than it took you to get there the first time, because you come back in with the same quality that you attained the last time. So it's a much faster trip each time, you see. So you get back to where you left off a lot quicker than it took you to get there the last time. So that's kind of the way that the reincarnation works.